Hi everyone. The other night I did a project using this plaid, started this box but never finished it. So what I thought I would do, instead of putting the same Christmas design as we did on the trivet, I would decorate this one with our Cabbage Rose stamps and show you another way that you can use the plaid background with something different. So these are our Cabbage Rose stamps. They come in 3 sizes. So there's 3 rose sizes and 3 leaf sizes so that you can match up what you're doing. So we're going to still use the same colors. We're going to use the 631 Rose Madder, and we're going to use the 632 Deep Crimson. And so if you put these out on a palette side by side, we're going to load some pouncer sponges to create the roses, and this may be something new to you. Maybe you've done this before. It's a real quick, easy way to get a nice look. If you're not a painter, you can do it with the sponges. So here we go. So I'm going to use the large one, and see, I'm matching up my sponge with that stamp so that I have an idea of what size rose I want. So take the spouncer or pouncer sponge on a stick and load both of those colors and kind of tap it into the sponge so that you get a nice load. So you should have half and half. And then what you're going to do is when you put it down on the piece, you're going to give it a slight twist or turn to the right. So I'm going to start in the middle with the large one and set it down. Give it a little bit of a twist. You can also tap it because you've got the plaid that's underneath, which is an uneven surface now. So you may do a little bit of tapping and then press and spin your sponge, just so that you get a nice solid coverage. Again, these are the color strokes. They are an opaque underglaze. They can be used on 04, 06 wear. They can be used on cone 6, cone 5 pieces also. I'm working on a earthenware, a piece by Duncan. This was a piece of purchased bisque that I have here. So I got out of my sponged area. So what I did was just take a damp square shader and blot it on a paper towel, and then just kind of swish off the excess that I didn't want there. Okay. So keep your color where you can get lots of product to make it opaque so that you cover those. You don't want it thick, you just want to make sure you have a nice solid coverage. So I've picked up the smaller sponge. I'm going to do roses in each corner. Same thing, tap it, give it a little spin to the right. Reload after each one so that you get a nice opaque application. And like I said, where your plaid overlaps, sometimes you may have a gap. So that's what I was doing, is just filling in that little bit of a gap with the corner of the sponge. So I'm kind of looking at the box itself and making sure that I'm somewhat even when I apply the roses. In other words, keep it about the same distance from each corner if you can. And so you're just going to repeat this. You could have them randomly all over the box if you only had one size. You can buy the stamps as a set, or you can buy them individually also. So maybe you only wanted one size. You could purchase those separately. So tap, spin to the right. And when you spin, you don't want to have so much pressure that you're oozing the product out of the sponge. You want to make sure that you're just gently tapping it, and then you get enough pressure that it stays seated on the bisque itself. Okay, so I've got those on the top. Now we're going to add the leaves. So I'm going to use 661 leaf green. And again, these are all color strokes. You could use color concentrates if you wanted. I'm also going to use the medium sumi brush And you can see here I'm picked up my stamps, and I'm showing you how you can visualize how large of a leaf you need, because we're going to paint the leaf and then we're going to stamp on top of it, same as with the roses. Okay, so I've got the medium sumi brush. The sumi brushes are very soft. They're not really made for brush strokes, but for this application they work really well. So I'm using 661 leaf green, and then I've got 665 forest green for my dark color. So always fully load in your light color and tip into the dark. You could use the color concentrates if you wanted to. Again, if you didn't have the color strokes, by all means you could do that. Okay, so we're going to fully load in the light green or leaf green. Work that into the hairs of the brush. You don't want it dripping off, but you do want it, you want all the hairs covered so you have a nice application. Tip into the dark green, and you just need the very, very tip of the brush. You don't need it real heavy. It is a dark color. You're going to press the brush down, pull, pull, lift, and as you lift, you're going to slightly turn the brush so that you can get to a point. Fully load, tip again, and let's pull in another one right beside it. Press, pull, and lift. So a brush stroke is a combination of color, pressure, and motion. So press, pull, and lift. Okay, I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm going to tilt the piece so that you can see the bristles of the brush, how much pressure I'm putting down, and the stroke. So press, pull, and lift. So I slightly twisted with my thumb and first finger just to come back to a point. So press, pull, and lift. So reload as you need to. Sometimes you may have enough of the light green that all you need is the dark green on the tip of the brush. Press, pull, and lift. Reload with lighter, tip in the darker. It's a good rule of thumb to put 3 leaves, keep it odd numbers, 2 and 1. So 2 on one side, 1 on the other. So I'm going to continue to do these leaves. Okay, so I've decided to do some design on the inside of the bottom of the box, so I'm going to just do the large and the small rose, just one of each. So tap it, slight spin, and then fill in your leaves just like you did on the lid. Fully load with the lighter green, tip into the darker green, press, pull, and lift. Press, pull, and lift. Remember, 3 and 1 is a good combination. Any odd number. Press, pull, and lift. And I'm turning my piece as I work because then your leaves are going different directions. Don't have everything exactly patterned the same. Okay, so let's clean out the palette, and now we're going to stamp. We're going to use the Coal Black CS 601. Again, these are opaque underglazes, so when we stamp with them, they are opaque. Be sure you always shake your product well before you start. Our products are in a gel base, and they tend to congeal inside the bottle, so the more you shake and agitate them, they will liquefy so that they're easier to use. So I've grabbed the stamp for the smaller roses, Again, using the pouncer or spouncer sponge on a stick, fully load it, and then tap onto the stamp. You can go back to some of the older videos on stamping, and you can make an ink pad and stamp that way. You can look that one up on our YouTube channel, or you can take the sponge and tap it onto the stamp. Now, I got a little bit of excess color down in the grooves. I don't want that to transfer onto my piece, so I've just taken a small sumi brush and I've lifted that color. You could rinse your stamp and start over. And so you're tapping it, and you want that to look glossy and to make sure you've got enough product on the stamp. And because our stamps are, this particular stamps, the ones that are on wooden blocks, are exact sizes of the actual stamp, you should be able to stand over or be able to be right over the top, is what I'm trying to say, of your stamp. In other words, there's not any excess to the stamp itself, so it's an easy way to make sure you get it where it's supposed to go. You definitely want to reload your stamp for each impression. Kind of sit it down. Remember, you're on an unlevel surface. You've got plaid underneath, you've got the color and it's sponged on, so there's different levels of color there. So press it firmly, but not so firm that you end up lifting product off, and give it a gentle wiggle back and forth, up and down, to make sure that you have good contact with your piece. Now, and again, if you get excess, be sure and clean that out so that you don't deposit a huge black blob. If you have areas that maybe all of the impression didn't adhere to the piece, like on that one there, I'm going to show you later how to fix that. And again, just like when we were, when you do any kind of sponging, don't keep that stamp in the same position. Turn the stamp differently, because it does have a pattern to it, so you want them to look different. Either turn your piece as you're applying, or turn the stamp itself. Okay, so then do the same thing with the large rose. Grab your other stamp, and this black is really thin, so I am getting some excess inside the stamp, so I'm just pulling that out with that small sumi brush. You can also grab a paper towel and blot it out. Line that up, press it down, a gentle wiggle back and forth. Okay, so you can see that it didn't fully get the area of the rose, and I'm going to show you how to fix that in just a minute. Again, reload for each impression. Okay, see all the excess on that one? There's a lot, so again, you can take it out with a brush, or you can use a paper towel. Sometimes it's the sponge that causes that. Different sponges have different densities, and so that can be the issue. It may not just be you and the loading, it could be the sponge itself, or the product is thin. Press down, gentle rock, make sure you've got contact, and then lift up. Okay, so we're going to grab the leaves now and do those. Again, try to line it up. You do have on the top of the stamp the direction. There's like a little photo of the stamp so that you don't get it turned backwards. So see how it's hard to see, but the point of the leaf is going out. Now, on the leaves, they're smaller. I got a couple of little blobs of black that I don't like, So you can take a damp brush. Because you've got the greens underneath there, I'm just taking a square shader, and it's damp. I blotted it on a paper towel, and I'm just gently lifting up some of that black that's in a larger, thicker area that I don't like. Just be careful that you don't smear what's already there. But because you have color underneath it, it's like an insurance coat that you can piddle with it a little bit and get it off of there. You would never want to take a sponge and try to wipe it off, because all you're going to do is smear all of your colors, including your background. So only take it off with the damp square shader or some type of brush. Okay, so let's continue to do all of our leaves. Turning your piece as you're working, so that you have better control over how your stamp is stamped, and it makes it more comfortable for you. So you can see how I constantly turn, cleaning off my sponge, or cleaning off my stamp as I need it also. Now I chose to use the same leaf stamp for all of my leaves on the large and the small roses. You could use a different size for the large. If you use the medium, the small, you can coordinate those if you want. I just kept this simple. Okay, so we're going to do the same on the inside of the box also. And when you're doing something on the inside, you want to, when you're doing your design, think about if you're using a stamp to do the outline, you don't want to get that design too close to the edges, because you won't be able to get your stamp in there, okay? So definitely think through your design before you start. You may need to, you could even set your set your stamps down in there and just see how much room you have. You could also take one of the watercolor markers and kind of draw a circle, draw a leaf where you think you want something on the inside, and that'll give you a better visual whether or not your stamp is going to fit in there. Alright, so I'm going to add some tendrils. I'm using the 3600 number 2 liner. It's a Kolinsky liner, which is a natural hair. And we're still going to stay with the black, but what happened is, remember I told you that the sponge was a little bit larger than the stamp, so I'm just taking the liner and the same coal black, and I'm just adding a similar line like the stamp has, just a wavy little line to create the excess area to make it fit. And we need to do that on our lid also. You can see here again, the stamp was a little bit, or excuse me, the sponge was a little bit larger, see that, than the stamp. So I'm just creating an additional outline so that it looks similar to the smaller ones. Otherwise your eye tends to go to that mistake, if you want to call it that. So I'm just adding some thin lines, the same thickness as the stamped line, and I'm just going over them once. You can also use this brush and the black and touch up any areas that maybe did not contact with your piece. So there was a gap in the outline. So just go back through and look at all your stamps. It mainly was on the rose that we had a few of them, and it's because of the stripes, the plaid that's in the background is the reason, because you've got an uneven surface, so the stamp cannot contact. It could be that your surface itself maybe isn't level. That happens too. All right, so let's add some tendrils now with the dark green, the 665 forest green. Load that same liner brush and then just decide where you want. You don't have to do curly cues, you can just do a wavy line and it gives you a illusion that it's a curl. So let's do some more. I'll show you some in both ways. So touch to the surface, pull, you can do a curl and then come out and off to the tip. So add these throughout your design. Don't go crazy with it, but see, you can just do a wavy line or you can actually put the curl in there. Some people say, oh, I can't make the loops, and you need to practice on it. When you get to the inside of the loop, you need to lift off the pressure of the brush and then press back down when you go into the straight. So, but you can just do it with wavy, wiggly lines too. That works perfectly well. Constantly load so you have the same color value for each one of these. And remember, the bisque is dry, so it's going to grab the moisture out of your brush, so that's why you have to load also more often. All right, let's put a few on the inside of the box here. And what you're doing is trying to make the design look even within the space that you have. So trying to balance it out is what you're doing. All right. So what I think I'm going to do is, let's look at this. So you've got the top, you've got the inside. So what I've decided to do is I am going to use a seawool sponge and the deep crimson 632, and I'm going to sponge the outside of the box. When you're using a seawool sponge, you need to wet it and then blot it out in a paper towel. The seawool sponge is a living thing, comes from the sea. Don't ever rinse it out in hot or even warm water. Just stay away from hot water because you'll actually make it brittle and you'll kill it, so to speak. So again, 632 deep crimson. So I've just wet the sponge in my water container. I put it in a paper towel, and then find an area that you like on the sponge. They have different texture, different larger openings, smaller openings. Load your sponge, tap off the excess because you don't want blobs of color, okay? And then look at where it is on your sponge, and then when you start to sponge, be very light, tickle the piece with the color. And as you are pressing down on the sponge, you want to change the direction. So don't just go one direction all the way across the piece, because you'll have what I call rabbit tracks. So you want to take and lift, when you lift the sponge up, you want to turn your hand so that you get a different pattern. Okay, so load it up, tap it out so you remove the excess, and then tap it onto the piece, turn the sponge, turn the sponge, turn the sponge, so that you have different patterns and it's not one continuous design across it. So constantly turn. If you did, you could do this with two colors. You could put the lighter pink first and then the dark on top. But just remember to tickle. If you press down hard, you're going to get a solid crimson blob. And then move to your sides and do those the same way, constantly turning. Okay, so we finished our edges. Because the sponge got up on the rim of the box, so I'm just going to take the sponge and make that a little more even, so it doesn't look like a mistake. It looks like you meant to do it. You could sponge on the inside around your design if you wanted, but I'm going to leave it plain and simple for this project. Alright, so let's do the inside of the lid also, just because when someone opens it up, it's a nice little surprise to have something in there besides just the white bare bisque. Same thing, keep changing the direction of your sponge, and then do that edge very carefully so that you don't get it out onto the stripes. There's different types of sponges out there that give you different looks. The yellow replacement sponge is not a good one to use. The seawool or the silk sponge. The silk sponge is a more dense and closer pattern. I like this seawool sponge, the natural seawool. There are synthetics out there for doing like faux finishes on walls and furniture and stuff. So keep that in mind if you're using that. You may get a different look. Alright, so let's look at our piece here. Looks pretty good. So here's your bottom, your sides. That looks really nice together. And some people wouldn't have thought to sponge and do the plaid together, but it works well with this particular design. Don't forget to sign your piece. I am using the 665 forest green with that same liner brush, and some people date their pieces, some don't. I usually put my date in mine. Sometimes I'll hide it inside of a leaf, but there's too much going on in these leaves. Okay, so I need to put in the fine line on the plaid like I did on the trivet. So I'm using the cap accessory kit, which has 2 caps, 4 different size tips as the plunger, and a green cleaning tool. So with the half a turn to the right, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, attach the black tip. Always practice. With the color strokes, they're fairly thin, so you don't have to apply much pressure to the bottle. So definitely test it before you go to your piece, because you don't want to squeeze out a blob. Keep a paper towel to wipe off the tip often, because otherwise you get a buildup of product. And as you can see on this one, I went to the right side, or the top side, of the mauve color, and I went to the left side of the ocean blue green stripe. So let's start these. Like I said, make sure you test on your palette before you go to your piece so that you're comfortable with doing this, because once it's there, it's there. Alright, so I'm just gonna, and I turn the tip so that it's sideways so that I can see what's flowing out, and I'm just gonna wave, and I'm just slightly above that mauve color stripe, and I'm going in and out of my design. You could have put this on first and then did your stamping and your sponging of your flowers and leaves over the top if you wanted to. It's whatever works best for you. Constantly wipe that tip off so that you don't have that bubble of color. And I'm just doing the top, and then I will come back at the end and do the edges and bringing it down the side. And the reason I do a wavy line is because then I don't have to be perfect and do a straight line. That's my reasoning for this. And for this particular design, because you've got the wavy stamp on the rose, it works well with that. So think about all of your elements of your design when you're doing something. Alright, so let's turn it, and we're going to do the other direction on our ocean blue green stripes. So I'm going underneath, but slightly lower. You don't want it right on the stripe, you want it below it. And when you're using the tip like this on the bottle, these lines will be opaque, which is nice. You don't have to do it with a liner. And because I had an area at the top that was open, we're going to imagine that that green stripe is over the edge. And that allows me to put another wavy line there. Then come down your sides and do the same thing, making sure that that line continues to the edge of the box. Again, keep that tip free. Make sure you don't set it down and get wet product on your surface and pull it off of your piece. So you can even let it dry and then come back and do it if you don't feel comfortable holding it. Okay. You could do outlines, you know, if you didn't have the stamps, you could do the black with the fine tip, and you could do your roses that way also. Alright, so we're going to use the CSP01 Gloss Medium NT Clear. This is an 0406 glaze. It is not, I repeat, it is not a cone 5-6 glaze. If you're doing this project on your B-Mix, your porcelain clay, or something you've cast in stoneware, just make sure you use a recommended zinc-free clear glaze. Our clear glaze will not go to the mid-range temperatures. It will craze the piece, okay? So only use our clear glaze if you're doing blending techniques, or if you're on your 0406 ceramic ware. Okay, so I'm using one of our fan brushes. I like to mist the piece before I glaze because that rebonds all the color to it. I know there's a myth out there, the longer you wait, the drier the product will be, it won't smear. I'm telling you, for 20 plus years I have used this technique and not had any issues. The issue is when you start overworking the brush on the surface, okay? But if you have a damp surface and a damp glaze, you'll be less likely to smear. Okay, so fully load your soft fan brush, and you definitely want to use a soft brush, not a hard bristle brush, because that will move your color also. I like to put down what I call 3 swipes. So I go 1, 2, and maybe a third one to brush out any excess that might build up or squish out the side of the brush. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Sometimes I do a fourth, but 1, 2, 3. So if you keep overworking and trying to use everything that's in that brush, you will smear it, because the more pressure, the more times you go back and forth over an area, you will tend to lift up whatever product is underneath. So try to do that rule of thumb: 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, 3. And I'm on that edge, so I'm trying to get it smooth. Our glaze is a 2-coat glaze. So I'm just patting the glaze on the edges. So you will see the colors through the glaze, through our glaze. So apply 1 coat, let it dry thoroughly, and then come back and apply a 2nd coat. Because if you try to do 2 right away, you're going to end up lifting off what you're putting on, and you need that to dry before you put your 2nd coat. You can fan dry it, but just try not to overwork. If you dip glaze, if you happen to be say a contemporary studio that dip glazes and you're having problems with pinholes, you can mist your pieces, then dip glaze, and that should help eliminate those. Just a food for thought. So same thing here on the bottom. I misted the piece, and now I'm going to glaze. Also, you may not know, but if you have it, like the lid of the box I have setting up on a jar to dry, but the bottom will set flush on your table. So if you lift that up with a pencil or with a ruler, a brush handle, anything to lift it off the surface, your piece will dry quicker. Or if you have the drying racks that are available in the ceramic market, you could set it on that also, and that will help your drying time. Otherwise, your piece just stays really, really damp, and it's going to take longer to dry. So just make sure that you get all those areas covered. And then I'm going to go ahead and just put a little bit on that rim. All right, guys. Stilt and Fire to a Cone 06. Happy painting.